Welcome. I'm Magnus, and I bring you horror stories to help you relax, or maybe to keep you up at night. Tell us where you're from. Are there spooky forests nearby? If you're a fan of scary stories, subscribe and drop a like. Get cozy, and let's begin. My name is Elias Thornton, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd end up alone in the Jemez Mountains of New Mexico. After my divorce finalized and the tech startup I'd poured 5 years into collapsed spectacularly, I cashed out my remaining assets and purchased a small, neglected cabin about 40 miles northwest of Santa Fe. A place to heal, my therapist had called it. If only she could see me now. The cabin itself wasn't much. A 2-bedroom structure built in the 1970s with weathered cedar siding and a metal roof that groaned under the weight of pine needles. The previous owner had installed solar panels and a rainwater collection system, which meant I could live comfortably off-grid while still enjoying basic amenities. My nearest neighbor, Marcus Whitaker, lived about 2 miles down an unpaved road. He was a Vietnam vet in his 70s who'd been living out here for nearly 20 years. His wife Doreen occasionally brought me fresh eggs from their chickens. The first month passed surprisingly well. I spent my days renovating the cabin, hiking the surrounding wilderness, and reading books I'd been putting off for years. The nights were different, impossibly quiet compared to my former life in Chicago, except when coyotes would yip and howl in the distance. Their cries always sounded unnervingly human to me, something between laughter and screaming. I'd been warned about mountain lions and bears, but Marcus had mentioned something else during one of his visits. "Watch out for the shadows that move against the wind," he'd said, his weathered face deadly serious. The Puebloans who lived here centuries ago called them skinwalkers, medicine men who committed evil acts to gain the power to transform into animals. Some locals claimed they still hunt in these mountains. I'd laughed it off as local folklore, but Marcus hadn't joined in. My sister Clara was the only person who regularly checked on me by satellite phone. "You can't hide from the world forever," she'd say during our weekly calls. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't hiding. I was finally finding myself without the constant noise of civilization drowning out my thoughts. Or so I believed, until the day I discovered the carvings. They were crude pictographs etched into a rock face about a mile from my property. Images of stick figures chasing what looked like deer, common enough Native American rock art. But one image stood out, a figure that wasn't quite human, with an elongated head and limbs that bent at impossible angles. Below it, someone had carved what appeared to be a warning in Spanish, the letters faded but still legible. "No camin solo en la noche." Don't walk alone at night. The isolation started getting to me after the second month. I began talking to myself, carrying on full conversations in different voices. I'd catch myself doing it and stop, disturbed by how natural it felt. Worse were the dreams, vivid nightmares of being hunted through the forest by something I couldn't quite see. Always waking up just before it caught me, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the chilly mountain air. That's when I started to notice other things. Items in my cabin moved from where I'd left them, muddy footprints on my porch that didn't match my boots, and strange scratches on my door that appeared overnight. Marcus and Doreen hadn't visited in weeks, and when I hiked to their property to check on them, their cabin appeared deserted, though their truck was still parked outside. The isolation that had once felt therapeutic now pressed against me like a physical weight. I tried calling Clara on the satellite phone, but all I got was static. When I checked the solar-powered battery bank, I discovered that someone, or something, had deliberately damaged the wiring. That's when I knew with certainty I wasn't alone out here. I decided to hike down to the main road and flag down a passing car, but a freak autumn snowstorm hit the mountains that afternoon. 6 inches of heavy, wet snow fell in just hours, making the steep trail treacherous. Forced to return to my cabin, I barricaded myself inside, pushing a heavy bookcase against the door and sleeping with my hunting knife under my pillow. Not that it helped me rest. I kept jerking awake, convinced I'd heard footsteps circling the cabin. By morning, the snow had stopped, but the damage was done. The trail down the mountain would be impassable for days. I needed to conserve my remaining food and find out what had happened to Marcus and Doreen. Despite every instinct screaming at me not to, I packed a day bag and set out for their cabin again, this time taking a different route through the forest. The woods were unnaturally silent that day. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Just the crunch of snow under my boots and my own labored breathing as I climbed over fallen trees and navigated around boulders. About halfway to my neighbor's place, I found something that made my blood run cold. A single moccasin print in the snow, the leather distinctive from any modern hiking boot. I recalled a conversation with Marcus months earlier about the region's history. He'd mentioned the Sanchez murders of 1879, when 7 members of a homesteading family were found slaughtered in these very mountains. The official report blamed a rogue band of Apache, but local legend held that something much older had claimed them, something that had been disturbed when the Sanchez family began digging a well near an ancient burial site. The sun was beginning its descent when I finally reached Marcus and Doreen's cabin. The door stood ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding pitifully small in the vast wilderness. No answer. I pushed the door open wider, revealing an interior that had been thoroughly ransacked, furniture overturned, cabinets emptied. But it wasn't a robbery. Their valuable items remained untouched. This was something else, a search, perhaps. On the kitchen table lay Marcus's journal, open to an entry dated just 3 days earlier. "It's back," he'd written in shaky handwriting. "The same thing that took the Henderson family in '97. Doreen wants to leave, but there's no outrunning this thing. It knows we've seen it." The next page had been torn out, but flecks of dried blood stained the remaining paper. Outside, the shadows lengthened as sunset approached. I needed to get back to my own cabin before dark, but something caught my eye near the tree line. Doreen's floral scarf, hanging from a pine branch. When I went to retrieve it, I noticed drag marks in the snow, leading deeper into the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed them. The trail ended at the entrance to a small cave partially hidden by overgrown brush. The mouth of the cave was adorned with strange symbols painted in what looked disturbingly like fresh blood. I recognized one symbol from my research into local indigenous cultures. It marked a boundary between worlds, a place where the veil was thin. I should have turned back then, but the thought of Marcus and Doreen potentially injured inside compelled me forward. The cave's darkness swallowed my flashlight beam like hungry mouths. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as I ventured deeper, my breath forming clouds before my face. Ancient petroglyphs covered the walls, similar to those I'd found near my property, but more elaborate, more disturbing. They depicted figures that were part human, part animal, surrounding stick-figure humans who appeared to be prostrate in worship or perhaps terror. A nauseating stench hit me about 50 feet in, the unmistakable smell of decay. My flashlight illuminated something pale against the dark stone floor. A hand, human, partially decomposed. I gagged, stumbling backward, nearly dropping my light. It wasn't attached to a body. Next to it lay what I recognized as Marcus's turquoise ring. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, the words echoing mockingly back at me. That's when I heard it, a low, wet breathing sound coming from deeper within the cave. Not animal, not quite human either. Something in between. The hairs on my arms stood straight up as a primal fear flooded my system. "Marcus," I called out weakly, knowing it wasn't him, couldn't be him. The breathing stopped abruptly. Then came the sound of something heavy dragging itself across stone, moving toward me. I ran. Blind panic propelled me back toward the cave entrance. Behind me, something gave chase. I could hear claws or nails scraping against rock, a guttural growl that no human throat could produce. I burst out into the fading daylight, not daring to look back, and sprinted through the woods toward my cabin. Tree branches whipped my face, drawing blood. I fell repeatedly, each time scrambling back to my feet, driven by pure terror. Night had fully fallen by the time I reached my cabin. I locked every window, every door, and sat with my back against the wall, clutching my rifle, listening. Around midnight, something circled my property. I could hear footsteps in the snow, sometimes sounding like a four-legged animal, sometimes like a bipedal creature. Whatever it was, it paced the perimeter until dawn, testing each window and door, scratching at the walls. By morning, it was gone, but it had left evidence of its visit. Deep claw marks in my front door and a dead rabbit placed carefully on my porch, its body contorted into an unnatural position that suggested ritual rather than predation. I recognized it as a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Either way, I knew I couldn't stay another night in that cabin. I packed essential supplies into my backpack: food, water, first aid kit, ammunition, and prepared to hike out, snow be damned. But as I was about to leave, I discovered my satellite phone was missing. I'd left it on the kitchen counter the night before, and now it was gone. Someone had been inside my cabin while I slept. The realization sent ice through my veins. Desperate for answers, I broke into Marcus's locked desk drawer and found a manila folder labeled Local Disappearances. Inside were newspaper clippings dating back to the 1950s, each detailing missing hikers, hunters, and even entire families who had vanished without trace in these mountains. Many mentioned strange animal behavior before the disappearances and unusual tracks found by search parties. Marcus had scribbled notes in the margins, cyclical, every 28 years, and not a what but a who. The final piece of paper was a hand-drawn map of the area with certain locations circled in red, including my cabin. Along the bottom, Marcus had written, sites of previous manifestations. Pattern suggests next appearance, November 2023. Today was November 12th. The trail down the mountain was treacherous, covered in partially melted snow that refroze into slick ice patches. I moved as quickly as I dared, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every snapped twig. About a mile from my cabin, I discovered boot prints in the mud. Not mine. Too large, heading in the same direction I was traveling. Someone else was on the trail. I froze, debating whether to call out. The prints looked human enough, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't trust appearances. Still, another person might mean safety, or at least answers. Hello, I called, my voice echoing through the silent forest. No response. I continued forward, following the tracks, my hand never far from the knife at my belt. The boot prints led to a small clearing where they abruptly vanished, not gradually fading, but stopping mid-stride as if their owner had simply ceased to exist. In the center of the clearing stood a crude shrine made of stacked stones, animal bones, and feathers. Atop it sat a small wooden figure, a human body with the head of a coyote. Its eyes were inlaid with what looked like real teeth. My instincts screamed at me to leave it alone, but I needed to understand what I was up against. I approached the shrine carefully, examining it without touching. Carved into one of the stones was a name I recognized, Sanchez. Below it were 6 more names, the Henderson family mentioned in Marcus's journal. And below those, freshly carved, Marcus and Doreen Whitaker. The final name made my heart stop, Elias Thornton. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a man wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, ordinary enough except for his face, which was obscured by what appeared to be a deer skull mask. He stood perfectly still, watching me. When he finally spoke, his voice was raspy, as if rarely used. "You shouldn't have come to this place," he said. "None of you should have. This land remembers the blood spilled upon it." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound confident. "I am what remains of John Sanchez," he replied, "or what he became after the change. The last of my family to walk these mountains." He took a step forward, and I noticed something wrong with his movements. Too fluid, joints bending in impossible ways. I backed away, raising my rifle. "Stay back. What happened to Marcus and Doreen? They knew the risks of living here. They made their peace decades ago, paid their tribute yearly. Until last month, when they tried to warn you, tried to break the cycle." He tilted his head at an unnatural angle. "The hunger cannot be denied. It must be fed." I fired a warning shot into the air. "I'm leaving this mountain. No one needs to get hurt." His laugh was chilling. "You misunderstand. No one leaves unless they're chosen to carry the story forward, to bring new offerings. The rest become part of the land." He removed the deer skull mask, revealing not a human face, but something that had once been human, features fluid and shifting, as if the skin were merely a poorly fitting disguise. I ran, not down the trail as I planned, but sideways, crashing through underbrush, seeking any escape route. Behind me, the thing that called itself John Sanchez let out a sound that started as a man's shout but morphed into a coyote's howl. Then came the sounds of pursuit, not one pursuer, but many, moving through the forest around me. They were hurting me, I realized with horror. Not chasing me away, but driving me toward something. I changed direction repeatedly, but somehow always found myself running uphill, back toward the area with the cave. My lungs burned, legs trembling with exhaustion, but primitive fear kept me moving. The forest itself seemed to conspire against me, branches reaching out like hands, roots rising to trip me, landmarks I'd passed appearing again and again as if I were running in circles. Dusk was falling when I finally broke through the tree line into a small mesa overlooking the valley. To my dismay, I recognized exactly where I was. Less than half a mile from the cave where I'd found Marcus's ring. The entire day of desperate flight had led me right back to where they wanted me. From this vantage point, I could see my cabin in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney, though I knew I'd extinguished the fire before leaving. Movement in the forest below caught my eye, figures moving between the trees, sometimes on all fours, sometimes upright. Not just one or two, but dozens, converging on my location. Among them, I spotted what appeared to be Marcus and Doreen, moving with the same unnatural gait as the others. Whatever had taken them had not killed them. It had transformed them. As the last light faded from the sky, I made my final mistake. Instead of making a stand on the mesa where at least I could see them coming, I decided to try for the road once more, taking a different route down the mountain. I hadn't gone 50 yards when I came face to face with what had once been Doreen Whitaker. Her kind eyes were now solid black, her mouth stretched in an impossible grin, revealing too many teeth. "We tried to warn you," she said in a voice that crackled like dying leaves. "We thought we could protect you by sending you away, but none escaped the hunger. It's your turn to join us or become us." She reached out a hand that seemed to have too many joints, fingers elongated into claw-like appendages. I fired my rifle directly into her chest. She staggered backward, but didn't fall. Instead, the wound closed before my eyes as she laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. More figures emerged from the darkness, surrounding me. Some wore the skins of animals. Others appeared almost normal until they moved. They herded me steadily toward the cave entrance, which now glowed with an unnatural blue light. With my ammunition nearly spent and no escape route left, I made one desperate gamble. I'd noticed during my earlier exploration that the cave ceiling near the entrance was unstable, riddled with cracks. I aimed my remaining shots not at my pursuers, but at the cave roof. The resultant collapse was more effective than I'd dared hope. Tons of rock crashed down, sealing the cave entrance completely. The inhuman shrieks that followed confirmed my suspicion. Whatever power animated these things was connected to that cave. Several of the creatures dropped to the ground, writhing in apparent agony. Others fled into the forest, their movements becoming more animal-like, less coordinated. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. That hope died as the ground beneath me began to tremble. What I hadn't realized, couldn't have known, was that the cave system extended far beneath the mountain, and my actions had destabilized it catastrophically. Massive sinkholes began opening in the forest floor as ancient chambers collapsed below. One formed directly beneath me, and I fell into darkness. I awoke hours later, trapped in a narrow space between fallen rocks, my left leg crushed and immobile. My flashlight had somehow survived the fall, revealing my dire situation. I was entombed alive, deep beneath the mountain. The air was growing stale. No one knew where I was. No one would come looking. In the beam of my dying flashlight, I discovered I wasn't alone in this stone coffin. Scattered around me were bones, dozens of skeletons of all sizes, some centuries old, others disturbingly recent. Among them, I recognized Marcus's turquoise ring and Doreen's reading glasses. And on the wall beside me, ancient pictographs depicting the very situation I found myself in, a sacrifice to appease whatever dwelled beneath the mountain. The most terrifying revelation came last. As my flashlight flickered out, my eyes began to adjust to what should have been total darkness. But there was light, a faint, blue luminescence emanating from the rocks themselves. And in that ghostly glow, I could see the stone around me shifting, reforming, creating a passage where none had existed before. The mountain itself was alive, aware, and hungry. I'm writing these final words using the Notes app on my phone, which somehow still has battery though no signal. If you're reading this, you found my phone, perhaps my remains. Do not stay in these mountains. Do not seek the caves. The stories of skinwalkers and demons were never meant to warn about external threats, but about what the land itself can turn you into. This place doesn't just take lives. It transforms them into something that can bring it more. I can feel the change beginning already. Even as the oxygen grows thin, my fingers are lengthening. My thoughts becoming less my own. I'm becoming something else. A guardian, a lure, another story to draw more offerings to these hungry mountains. My name is Vanessa Caldwell, 36 years old, and I came to Abiquiu, New Mexico, searching for silence after 15 years as a trauma nurse in Boston had left me hollow. The constant parade of human suffering had become too much, and when my mother died, leaving me her modest inheritance, I used it to buy a small adobe home on 3 acres of high desert land outside town. Georgia O'Keeffe country, they called it. Stark landscapes in burnt sienna and ghost white, where the line between earth and sky blurred into infinity. The property had been retrofitted with modern off-grid amenities, solar panels, rainwater harvesting system, composting toilet, and a small greenhouse where I could grow food year-round. My neighbors were few and distant. The Herrera family about a mile east who raised goats and made cheese, and an artist colony about 2 miles west where a rotating cast of painters and sculptors came to capture the famous New Mexico light. In between was nothing but juniper trees, chamisa brush, and the occasional coyote. Those first few months were exactly what I needed. I spent my days tending the greenhouse, hiking the nearby mesas, and learning to identify native plants. I'd sit for hours watching thunderstorms roll across the valley, lightning illuminating the distant Jemez Mountains. At night, the stars were so numerous and bright they cast shadows. The silence was profound. No sirens, no voices, no mechanical hums, just the whisper of wind through pinyon pines and the occasional call of a great horned owl. I'd been warned about the usual dangers, rattlesnakes, scorpions, the occasional mountain lion. But Rosa Herrera, a 6th-generation local who brought me fresh goat cheese weekly, warned me of something else. "Be careful of La Llorona," she'd said, only half joking. "They say she wanders these arroyos looking for children to replace the ones she drowned." When I laughed, she added more seriously, "Just because we give fear a name doesn't make it less real. This land has seen much blood, both Spanish and native. Some stains never wash away." My sister Jenna thought I'd lost my mind. "You're going to get murdered out there in the middle of nowhere," she'd say during our weekly video calls. She couldn't understand how the emptiness that terrified her was exactly what healed me. My nightmares of dying patients had finally stopped, replaced by dreamless sleep so deep I sometimes woke confused about what day it was. It was on one of my hikes that I first noticed the shrine, a small stone structure tucked against a cliff face, easily missed unless you knew where to look. Inside were dozens of milagros, small metal charms in the shapes of body parts, pinned to a wooden board alongside faded photographs and handwritten notes. Many dated back decades. All were prayers for healing, but with an unsettling pattern. The miracles requested were always the same illness, but in different people, spanning generations of what appeared to be the same families. I became fascinated with local history, spending days in Abiquiu's tiny library reading about the region. The librarian, an elderly man named Miguel, seemed pleased by my interest until I mentioned the shrine. His smile vanished. "That's on your property?" When I nodded, he pushed a book across the table, a collection of local folklore. "Read page 94, he said, then excused himself, leaving me alone among the stacks. The book described an incident from 1885 when a traveling doctor named Harlan Blackwood settled in the area, promising cures for ailments that had plagued certain local families for generations. His treatments worked miraculously, but patients soon developed new, worse symptoms. When 7 children died within a week, suspicious townspeople discovered Blackwood conducting bizarre experiments in an underground room beneath his clinic. They hanged him from a cottonwood tree, but not before he cursed the land and all who lived upon it. According to the account, Blackwood's clinic had stood exactly where my house now did. That evening as I drove home, the sunset painted the cliffs blood red. For the first time, the vast emptiness around my property felt oppressive rather than liberating. I noticed something I'd overlooked before, a pattern in how the juniper trees grew, forming an almost perfect circle around my home, with nothing growing in the center except for the non-native plants in my greenhouse. As if the land itself was isolating something. Sleep evaded me that night as wind howled around my adobe walls. carrying whispers that almost formed words. I told myself it was just the stress of learning my property's disturbing history, but each creak and groan of the house seemed to carry intention. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by what sounded like a child's laughter coming from my greenhouse. I sat upright, heart pounding, certain I'd dreamed it, until it came again, followed by the distinct sound of small hands patting against glass. At dawn, I searched the greenhouse thoroughly, finding nothing except muddy smudges on several panes that looked disturbingly like tiny handprints. I scrubbed them away, telling myself they could have been there for months unnoticed. But deep down, I knew they were fresh. That afternoon, I drove into town and bought security cameras, installing them around my property. Just for wildlife observation, I explained when Rosa Herrera caught me mounting one facing the road. She didn't look convinced. The cameras captured nothing unusual for 3 nights, though each morning I'd wake to find small objects in my house slightly moved. A coffee mug on a different shelf, my reading glasses upside down, shoes arranged neatly when I'd left them scattered. When I checked the security footage, there were inexplicable gaps, moments where the recording jumped forward, skipping minutes or sometimes hours with no explanation. The system was new, the batteries full. It made no sense. I started having dreams about children, specific children I didn't recognize but somehow knew. In these dreams, they would lead me by the hand to different parts of my property, pointing at the ground with solemn expressions. I began to sleepwalk, waking to find myself standing in my yard under the stars, the desert cold biting through my nightgown. Once, I woke clutching a rusted surgical scalpel I'd apparently dug up while unconscious. The handle bore initials, HB. Miguel from the library finally agreed to visit after weeks of my persistent questions. He walked my property line slowly, pausing at certain spots to bend down and examine the soil. "You shouldn't stay here," he finally said. "There's a reason this land was cheap." When I pressed him for details, he sighed heavily. "Every family that's lived here has lost someone, usually the youngest. They get sick with symptoms doctors can't explain. Sometimes they recover, but they're never the same. The Blackwood curse, people call it." That night, I found an old journal hidden in a space behind the adobe bricks in my bedroom. The diary of a woman named Elizabeth who had lived in my house in the 1920s. Her entries detailed her daughter's mysterious illness and desperate search for a cure. The final pages described dreams exactly like mine, leading her to dig in specific locations around the property. I found his instruments. She wrote in increasingly erratic handwriting. "Clean, preserved, impossible after 40 years buried. Tomorrow I try the treatment. God forgive me." I spent hours researching Harlan Blackwood online, finding only brief mentions in historical medical journals. He'd studied under a doctor who'd been dismissed from Johns Hopkins for ethical violations involving experimental treatments. According to one account, Blackwood had developed a theory that certain ailments could be transferred from one person to another through a specific procedure involving trace amounts of metals found only in the soil around a Bicuyo. The same metals, I realized with growing horror, that gave the distinctive red color to the cliffs surrounding my property. The headaches began 3 days later, crushing pain that left me nauseated and barely able to stand. Local doctors found nothing wrong, suggesting stress and altitude adjustment. But I recognized the symptoms from Elizabeth's journal entries describing her daughter's initial decline. When I developed a rash and perfect circles on my arms, identical to the one she'd documented, I knew with certainty. Whatever had haunted this land for generations had now fixed its attention on me. I decided to leave, to abandon the house and everything in it. As I packed my car, Rosa Herrera appeared at my gate. "You've been digging," she said. Not a question. When I didn't respond, she continued, "The Blackwood curse doesn't follow you if you leave, but it finds someone else. Always the most vulnerable person connected to this place. Who do you think it will choose next?" The implication was clear. If I fled, the curse might target her young grandchildren who sometimes helped deliver cheese to my house. The headaches intensified that night, accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Children playing in my bedroom corners, their skin pale as milk, eyes dark as wells. They whispered to each other in an archaic Spanish I somehow understood despite never having studied the language. They spoke of the doctor, of his hands that hurt and healed, of his promise that their suffering would save others. When I screamed at them to leave, they simply smiled with two wide mouths and pointed to the floor beneath my bed. I tore up the floorboards in a frenzy, uncovering a small tin box containing medical instruments, scalpels, clamps, and vials filled with reddish powder. According to the date etched on the box, they'd been buried there in 1954, yet showed no signs of corrosion or age. Alongside them was a leather-bound notebook filled with detailed medical procedures written in Blackwood's hand, describing how to transfer illness from one body to another. The final pages contained names, dozens of them, spanning generations of local families, including the Herreras. Miguel confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. The shrine I'd found wasn't left to petition saints for healing, as I'd first thought. It was a marker, a warning about Blackwood's burial site. When they hanged him, his body disappeared before they could burn it, Miguel explained, his voice low. 3 days later, the first child fell ill. They say Blackwood found a way to live on through his curse, that he needs a caretaker, someone to continue his work. The instruments find their way into new hands every generation. That night, my fever spiked to dangerous levels. In my delirium, I saw Blackwood himself standing at the foot of my bed, a tall figure in a blood-stained doctor's coat, his face obscured by a crude leather mask with tubes where the mouth should be. He didn't speak aloud, but his voice filled my head nonetheless. "You have a healer's hands," he said. "I've been watching you care for the dying for years. Together, we could perfect the treatment." The visions continued for days as my health deteriorated. Children would appear beside my bed, reaching for me with pleading eyes. "Make us better," they would whisper, "like you did in the hospital." Their features would shift between the faces of patients I'd lost in Boston and children I'd never seen before. Rosa's grandchildren began appearing among them, though I knew they were still alive and healthy. It was a premonition, I realized, or a threat. In more lucid moments, I studied Blackwood's notebook, horrified to discover his treatment involved transferring illness from wealthy patients to poorer children, particularly from Hispanic and Native families. He believed certain people were natural vessels for disease, that their suffering could purify others. Most disturbing was how closely his pseudoscientific theories paralleled legitimate medical research being done today on transferring antibodies between patients, as if he'd somehow glimpsed future medical knowledge through his depraved experiments. The shrine drew me like a magnet. I found myself walking there at odd hours, sometimes remembering the journey, sometimes coming to awareness already kneeling before the Milagros. Each time, I returned to my house with soil under my fingernails, though I had no memory of digging. The headaches subsided whenever I visited the shrine, only to return with greater intensity when I stayed away. It was training me, I realized, creating a reward system to draw me deeper into its influence. I awoke one morning to find I'd written prescriptions in my sleep, detailed medical protocols using Blackwood's techniques combined with my modern nursing knowledge. The handwriting was mine, but different, more precise, more confident. The procedures described would work, I realized with growing horror. They would heal one person by transferring their illness to another. Worst of all, part of me, the exhausted nurse who had watched too many patients die despite modern medicine's best efforts, found the idea tempting. Rosa Herrera arrived unannounced that afternoon with her youngest grandchild, Miguel Jr., a boy of about 7 with bright eyes and a persistent cough. "He's been sick for weeks," she said, watching me intently. Doctors in Santa Fe found nothing wrong. She placed his small hand in mine, and instantly my headache vanished, replaced by a surge of energy so intense my vision sharpened. The boy's cough worsened as my symptoms disappeared. Rosa noticed the change in both of us and nodded grimly. "So it's chosen you," she said, "just like it chose my great-grandmother in her time." "Take him home," I ordered Rosa, backing away from the child whose breathing had become noticeably labored in just minutes of contact with me. She gathered Miguel Jr. into her arms, but didn't leave. Instead, she sat at my kitchen table, her weathered face set in determined lines. "You don't understand what's happening to you," she said. "My family has watched this curse work for generations. Fighting it only makes it worse." She explained how Blackwood's experiments had continued long after his death through unwilling participants. People like me who moved onto the land, began experiencing symptoms, and discovered they could ease their suffering by transferring it to others. Some fled, passing the curse to another family member. Others embraced the power, becoming feared healers who treated the wealthy ranchers and politicians of northern New Mexico while sacrificing poorer patients. My great-grandmother was one who tried to fight it, Rosa said. It cost her 3 children before she gave in. That night, my condition worsened dramatically. Blood vessels burst in my eyes, turning the whites crimson. My skin burned as if scraped with sandpaper. I hallucinated Blackwood performing surgery on me, replacing my organs with strange mechanical devices that pulsed with red light. I crawled to my car, determined to get to the hospital in Santa Fe, but couldn't remember how to start the engine. When dawn finally came, I found myself back at the shrine, a bloody scalpel in my hand, and no memory of how I'd gotten there. Rosa returned with 3 other elders from local families, descendants of Blackwood's victims who had monitored the curse for generations. They explained that every few decades, someone with healing abilities was drawn to the property: nurses, doctors, caregivers of all kinds. The land itself seemed to call to them, offering the isolation they craved after witnessing too much suffering. Then the curse would take hold, offering them an impossible choice: become its instrument or suffer increasingly horrific symptoms until death or madness took them. "There's one way to break free," said Carmen, the oldest of the group. "Find where Blackwood is buried and destroy his remains. The instruments must be burned with him, the ashes scattered in running water. But no one has ever found the grave. Many have tried." She showed me burn scars covering her hands. The result, she explained, of trying to destroy Blackwood's instruments decades ago when they had appeared to her daughter. "They cannot be destroyed by ordinary means," she warned. "They always return." That afternoon, I followed the children from my dreams, now visible even while I was awake. They led me to different spots on my property, where I dug frantically, uncovering more instruments, journals, and once, a child's skull with a perfect circular hole drilled through the forehead. But no grave. As sunset approached, I collapsed from exhaustion, my symptoms now so severe I could barely move. That's when I noticed something odd about the greenhouse: how the plants inside seemed to grow in patterns, forming symbols visible only from above. Using my drone to take aerial photographs, I confirmed my suspicion. The plants I'd been unconsciously tending had grown into occult symbols matching those in Blackwood's journals. The greenhouse itself was positioned at the exact center of the juniper circle I'd noticed when I first moved in. Most telling, the soil inside the greenhouse was different from the rest of the property: darker, richer, almost black compared to the reddish soil of a biquiu. I hadn't brought it in. It had been there when I purchased the property. I broke through the greenhouse floor that night, digging through the strange soil until my shovel struck something solid about 6 feet down. Not bones as I'd expected, but a lead-lined box large enough to hold a body. I pried it open to find it packed with red earth surrounding a leather mask with tubes and valves. The same mask I'd seen Blackwood wearing in my visions. The moment I touched it, electricity seemed to surge through my body. My symptoms vanished instantly, replaced by a rush of power so intense I laughed aloud involuntarily. The mask seemed to speak directly into my mind, offering knowledge, power, and complete healing in exchange for continuation of the work. I saw visions of all I could accomplish, curing diseases modern medicine had failed to conquer, saving countless lives in exchange for just a few sacrifices. All I needed to do was put on the mask, accept my role as Blackwood's successor. The rational part of my brain recognized this as the curse asserting control, but the healer in me, the nurse who had watched too many patients die needlessly, found it seductively logical. Rosa and the others must have been watching my property, for they arrived just as I held the mask to my face. They rushed into the greenhouse, Carmen throwing herself at me with surprising strength for her age. In the struggle, the mask fell into the excavation pit. Instantly, my symptoms returned with devastating force, dropping me to my knees. "Burn it all," Carmen commanded the others. "Everything must go into the fire, including the soil. It's his essence, his real remains." The fire burned all night, fed by the strange soil, Blackwood's instruments, and the greenhouse itself. Black smoke billowed upward, forming shapes that seemed almost human before dissipating into the night sky. The mask resisted the flames longest, the leather blackening but never quite catching fire until Carmen threw some kind of herb bundle onto the pyre. The resulting flare was so intense it temporarily blinded me. When my vision cleared, the mask was finally burning, the tubes melting into the lead box. My symptoms receded as the fire consumed Blackwood's relics, but didn't disappear entirely. "It will take time," Rosa explained. "The curse has been working on you for months. Its roots go deep." She and the others took turns watching over me as I sweated through fever dreams where Blackwood alternately pleaded and threatened, promising miracle cures one moment and agonizing death the next. For 3 days and nights, I hovered between lucidity and delirium as the curse fought to maintain its hold. On the 4th morning, I woke feeling clearer but fundamentally changed. My nurse's intuition, once my professional strength, had sharpened to something almost supernatural. I could sense the illnesses in Carmen's body, her arthritis, her weakening heart, her early-stage lung cancer she hadn't yet told the others about. More disturbingly, I knew instinctively how I could ease her suffering by channeling it elsewhere. The knowledge remained even though Blackwood's tools were destroyed. "It's not completely gone," I confessed to Rosa as we sat watching the sun rise over the mesas. "I can feel it inside me, dormant but waiting." She nodded, unsurprised. "The curse adapts. Each time we think we've destroyed it, it finds a new form. My great-grandmother burned different relics. Her mother before her did the same. The details change, but the choice remains." She took my hand, examining my palm as if reading my future. "You must decide what kind of healer you will be. One who saves through sacrifice or one who accepts the natural limits of life and death." I chose to stay in Abiquiu, transforming my home into a hospice for terminal patients from the surrounding communities. I used my nursing skills, only my nursing skills, to ease suffering rather than unnaturally prolong life. The headaches returned occasionally, always accompanied by dreams of Blackwood offering easier solutions, shortcuts through others' pain. Sometimes I'd wake to find I'd sleepwalk to the site where the greenhouse had stood, my hands dirty from digging in soil that remained stubbornly barren no matter what was planted there. Carmen died peacefully under my care 6 months later, the cancer having spread faster than anyone expected. As I sat with her body waiting for the funeral home, she appeared to me one last time in a waking vision. "He's still here," she whispered, her form shimmering in the early morning light. Not in the soil or in objects, but in the knowledge itself, the temptation to heal at any cost. She reached out, her hand passing through mine like smoke. Each generation must make the choice anew. 3 years have passed since I burned Blackwood's mask. My hospice has helped dozens of people transition peacefully from this world, their families surrounding them with love rather than false hope. I've trained local youth in palliative care techniques, creating a new generation of healers who understand that sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply bearing witness to suffering rather than frantically trying to cure it. The dreams of Blackwood have faded to rare occurrences, usually during electrical storms when the air fills with ozone and possibility. Last week, a young doctor from Albuquerque contacted me about purchasing my property. She described herself as burned out from emergency medicine, looking for quiet and isolation to heal. Her email spoke of nightmares, a feeling she could have saved more people if only she'd had better tools or knowledge. As I read her words, a familiar headache began building behind my eyes, and I swore I could hear children laughing from the barren patch where my greenhouse once stood. I didn't respond to her email. Instead, I drove to the Herrera farm where Rosa, now in her 80s, still made goat cheese with her grandchildren's help. Miguel Jr., fully recovered from his mysterious illness, helped me load my car with stone markers we had prepared for this moment. That night, under the vast star-filled sky, we ringed my property with warnings carved in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Tewa. Not no trespassing signs that invite curiosity, but stories, true accounts of what has happened here across generations, the names of those who suffered, and the nature of the choice that awaits anyone who dares to call this place home. The land remains poisoned, but at least now it cannot hide its nature behind beautiful sunsets and promises of peaceful isolation. Whatever force Blackwood awakened or brought here continues to await its next vessel, but it will have to do so in plain sight, named and known for what it is. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice by staying. If my presence here acts as a cork in a bottle, containing something that might otherwise spread beyond these 3 acres. Other days, I fear I'm simply its guardian, keeping its secrets until someone with less resistance arrives to continue the work. Either way, I remain the nurse who came to the desert seeking peace and found instead an endless vigil, a healer wounded by her own compassion, standing watch over a curse that can never truly die as long as we believe some lives are worth more than others. My name is Gabriel Martinez, 41 years old, and after 20 years building a lucrative but soul-crushing career in corporate law in Los Angeles, I decided to reconnect with my roots by purchasing my late grandfather's abandoned sheep ranch near Chimayo, New Mexico. The 40-acre property sat in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, with views across the Española Valley that stole what little breath the 7,000-foot elevation left me. My grandfather Ramon had died before I was born, but my father had filled my childhood with stories of summers spent on the ranch, of crystal-clear night skies, and the profound silence of the high desert. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure built in the 1880s, with thick walls that kept the interior cool even during scorching summer days. I'd spent most of my savings modernizing it with solar panels, a well with an electric pump, satellite internet, and other amenities that would allow me to work remotely while living completely off-grid. The isolation was precisely what I needed. My nearest neighbors were the Vigil family 3 miles down the dirt road, an older couple who kept to themselves except for occasional deliveries of fresh eggs and locally made red chili. The first few months were productive beyond my expectations. I worked fewer hours but accomplished more, taking breaks to hike the arroyos and mesas surrounding my property. I began learning traditional woodworking techniques from Pedro Vigil, who had been a master santero, a carver of religious icons, before arthritis twisted his hands into painful claws. In the evenings, I would sit on my portal watching thunderstorms roll across the valley, sipping bourbon and listening to coyotes call to each other from ridge to ridge. It was during one of my hikes that I first noticed the petroglyphs, ancient rock carvings hidden in a small canyon about a mile from my house. Most depicted typical ancestral Puebloan imagery, spiral patterns, animals, humanoid figures with triangular bodies. But one panel stood apart, obviously carved much later with metal tools rather than stone. It showed a tall, skeletal figure surrounded by smaller human forms laid out in a circle, their hands and feet bound with what looked like rope. At the bottom, someone had scratched a date, April 17, 1887. I took photos, intending to ask the Vigils about it. Maria Vigil's face paled when I showed her the images on my phone. "Those are on your property." When I nodded, she crossed herself quickly. "That canyon, we call it Canon de los Muertos. The Dead Canyon. Your grandfather never told your father about it." When I shook my head, she exchanged a look with Pedro that contained volumes of unspoken communication. "There are places in these mountains where the veil between worlds is thin," she finally said. "Best to leave them undisturbed." That night, I dreamed of the canyon, vivid, lucid dreams where I watched a group of men in late 19th century clothing drag struggling figures across the desert. Their prisoners wore ragged clothes and had burlap sacks over their heads. The men took them to the exact spot where I'd found the petroglyphs and arranged them in a circle, just as depicted in the carving. A tall man in a black coat produced a leather-bound book and began reading aloud in a language I couldn't understand. I woke drenched in sweat just as he pulled a long knife from his coat. Unable to fall back asleep, I began researching the history of my property. County records showed my grandfather had purchased the ranch in 1954 from the Ortega family, who had owned it since Spanish colonial times. There was a curious gap in the property's recorded history between 1887 and 1889, when ownership had transferred from Joseph Miller, an Anglo settler from Missouri, to the Catholic Church, which then quickly sold it to the Ortegas at a suspiciously low price. The same date from the petroglyph, April 17, 1887, appeared in the margins of one document with no explanation. The more I dug into local history, the more references I found to something called La Ceremonia de los Huesos, the ceremony of bones, supposedly practiced by a splinter group of penitents in the late 1800s. The penitents were a lay Catholic brotherhood known for intense devotional practices, including self-flagellation during Holy Week, but this particular ritual was considered blasphemous even by their standards. According to a journal kept by the local priest of that era, the ceremony involved communing with entities from beyond the veil to gain unholy knowledge of future events. The same journal mentioned Miller by name, claiming he had corrupted several local men with promises of wealth and power in exchange for participation in heathen rites. I might have dismissed these accounts as superstitious folklore had I not discovered a hidden storage space beneath the floor of what had once been my grandfather's bedroom. Inside was a metal box containing a collection of newspaper clippings from 1887, documenting the disappearance of 7 migrant workers from the Miller Ranch, and later, the mysterious deaths of 5 local men, including Miller himself, all found arranged in a circle in the canyon, their bodies desiccated as if they'd been dead for months though they'd been seen alive just days before. The final article reported the case closed, the deaths attributed to exposure to the elements, despite the bizarrely arranged bodies and the fact that all 5 men's eyes had been removed with surgical precision. The dreams intensified after my discovery, becoming more detailed and disturbing each night. I now saw the faces of the men clearly, Joseph Miller and 4 Hispanic men from the village. Their prisoners were migrant workers, mostly Mexican and Native American, hired for the spring lambing season. In the dreams, Miller would read from his book as the bound workers struggled and pleaded. Then, one by one, he would slaughter them while reciting names I somehow understood belonged to people not yet born. The final name he uttered before I always woke was my own, Gabriel Martinez. I became obsessed with understanding what had happened in that canyon. My work suffered as I spent days in local archives and historical societies, piecing together fragments of the story. Miller, I learned, had been a member of an occult society in St. Louis before moving west, supposedly to establish a new chapter of the organization in the relatively isolated region of northern New Mexico. He had chosen my grandfather's property specifically for some geographic feature that made it suitable for contact, according to letters he'd written to associates back east. Pedro Vigil finally agreed to tell me what he knew after weeks of my persistent questioning. Miller believed the canyon was a gateway, he explained, his voice dropping to a whisper though we were alone on his porch. A place where the boundaries between worlds were weaker. The old ones, the Tewa people, knew this. That's why those petroglyphs are there. Warnings, not decorations. He described how Miller had convinced several local men to join his investment group, promising to use supernatural means to glimpse future markets and build untold wealth for all involved. The ceremony required blood sacrifice, Pedro continued, unable to meet my eyes. The life force of 7 to open the gateway, 5 to receive the knowledge. It worked after a fashion. They saw visions of the future, wrote down everything. Stock markets, wars, inventions not yet created. But something else came through the gateway too, something that wasn't finished with them. He described how the 5 participants, Miller included, had grown increasingly erratic in the days following the ritual, complaining of headaches and strange whispers. They returned to the canyon one night without explanation and were found days later, dead and arranged in the same circle where they'd conducted their ceremony. That night, I found myself sleepwalking for the first time in my life. I woke standing in my kitchen, an old hunting knife in my hand, the back door open to the moonlit landscape. On the table was a crude map I'd apparently drawn while unconscious, showing a route to a specific part of the canyon I hadn't yet explored. Most disturbing was the list of names I'd written below the map, the same names Miller had recited in my dreams, with my own at the bottom, all in my handwriting, but not my style, the letters spidery and antique in their formation. The archaeologist I consulted from the University of New Mexico was fascinated by my petroglyphs, but troubled by my dreams. Place memories are a documented phenomenon, Dr. Salazar explained cautiously. Certain locations seem to record traumatic events in ways science can't yet explain. Sensitive individuals sometimes pick up these impressions. When I showed her the map I'd drawn while sleepwalking, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. This matches a topographical feature we've documented at several significant archaeological sites in the region, a specific arrangement of land formations that indigenous cultures often associated with communication with the spirit world. Despite every rational part of my brain screaming against it, I felt compelled to follow the map. The spring weather had turned unexpectedly cold, with a late snowstorm dusting the mountains and casting the landscape in ghostly white. The path led me deeper into the canyon than I'd previously ventured, eventually arriving at a circular clearing surrounded by unusually vertical rock formations that resembled crude pillars. In the center, partially covered by centuries of eroded soil, was a flat stone bearing faded carvings similar to those I'd found earlier, but more elaborate and somehow more unsettling. As I brushed away debris to examine the carvings, my fingers found a seam in the stone. Further clearing revealed it to be a cover of sorts, concealing a hollow space beneath. Inside was a bundle wrapped in decaying oilcloth that crumbled at my touch, revealing a book identical to the one Miller had read from in my dreams. Leather-bound, its pages yellowed but intact, filled with handwritten text in multiple languages including Latin, Greek, and something that resembled Hebrew but wasn't quite right. Interspersed with the text were diagrams of astronomical alignments, anatomical drawings, and maps of what I recognized as the night sky, but with constellations connected in unfamiliar patterns. The inside cover bore an inscription, "Property of J. Miller, St. Louis Hermetic Brotherhood of the Seven Stars." Below it, in different handwriting, were the words, "The gateway opens both ways. They are coming through. God forgive us." Most disturbing was a folded paper tucked between the pages, a list of predictions spanning from 1887 to the present day, with uncanny accuracy. The 1918 Spanish flu, both world wars, the atomic bomb, Kennedy's assassination, 9/11. The final prediction on the list was dated exactly 1 week from today, containing just 3 words: "The gateway reopens." That night, a strange aurora danced across the northern New Mexico sky, ribbons of green and purple light undulating in patterns that local news reports called unprecedented at this latitude. I watched from my portal as the lights pulsed in perfect synchronicity with a growing headache behind my eyes. The pain intensified until I could barely stand, driving me to my knees as visions flooded my mind. Miller and his cohorts in the canyon, the sacrifice, but now from their perspective, feeling their anticipation, their terrible curiosity, their dawning horror as they realized something vast and ancient had noticed their ritual and turned its attention toward them. The book seemed to call to me from where I'd placed it in a locked cabinet, a subtle vibration I could feel throughout the house. When I finally gave in and retrieved it around midnight, the headache immediately subsided. I found myself able to understand passages that had been incomprehensible earlier, the strange languages now reading as clearly as English. The text described entities that existed between the spaces of reality, beings that perceived time non-linearly and could grant knowledge of future events in exchange for specific sacrifices. Most crucially, it detailed how the ritual created a connection, a doorway that, once opened, could never be fully closed. The names on my sleepwalking list weren't random, I realized with growing horror. Each was a descendant of one of the original participants in Miller's ritual, including myself. Ramon Martinez, my grandfather, had been Joseph Miller's local foreman. The book claimed that blood called to blood across generations, that cosmic debts incurred by ancestors could be collected from their progeny. Every 50 years, the alignment of certain stars created a window where the gateway could be fully reopened, allowing something to cross over completely. The last such alignment had occurred in April 1937, exactly 50 years after the original ceremony. Historical research confirmed that in April 1937, 5 men from local families, all descendants of Miller's group, had disappeared while camping in the canyon, their bodies discovered in the now familiar circular arrangement, desiccated and eyeless. The incident had been officially attributed to a peyote ritual gone wrong, the missing eyes explained as the work of scavenging wildlife. Similar disappearances had occurred in 1987, though the bodies were never found. Only abandoned camping equipment and inexplicable markings carved into the canyon walls. Pedro Vigil's health had deteriorated rapidly since our conversation, his wife Maria confiding that he'd been having terrible nightmares. When I visited him in the hospital in Santa Fe, his eyes were wild with fever. "They're calling us back," he whispered, clutching my arm with surprising strength. "All the bloodlines, all the descendants. Can't you hear them? With dawning horror, I realized Pedro must be a relation of one of the original participants. Before I could ask, he continued, "Your grandfather knew. That's why he never returned after 1987. He felt the pull but resisted. It claimed others instead." That night, driving back to my ranch under the still shimmering aurora, I realized my headlights were illuminating figures standing along the roadside. Gaunt, motionless silhouettes spaced at regular intervals, each facing the direction of the canyon. When I slowed down, they vanished, only to reappear farther ahead. Each had the same distinctive stance, heads tilted at an identical unnatural angle, as if listening to something inaudible to normal human ears. By the time I reached my property, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my door. Inside, I found my phone filled with missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, all from different states. When I finally answered one, a woman's voice asked if I was Gabriel Martinez of Chimayo, then explained that she was calling from Oregon because her father, Vernon Miller, a distant cousin of Joseph Miller, had disappeared 3 days ago, leaving behind only a hand-drawn map of what appeared to be a canyon in northern New Mexico, and a note saying he was answering the summons. Similar calls followed throughout the night, from Colorado, Arizona, Texas, California, all descendants of the original 5 men, all reporting family members who had suddenly become obsessed with traveling to New Mexico. I spent that night translating more of Miller's book, learning that the ritual had never been completed in 1887. The entities they contacted had promised knowledge in exchange for 7 lives, but demanded that the 5 participants would serve as vessels for something trying to cross over. Realizing too late what they'd agreed to, Miller and his associates had attempted to close the gateway by taking their own lives in a specific ritual manner. They had succeeded only partially, postponing the crossing rather than preventing it, binding it to a celestial cycle that would create another opportunity every 50 years. The final piece fell into place when Dr. Salazar called the next morning. She'd been consulting astronomers about the unusual aurora. "This is going to sound crazy," she said, her academic detachment failing to mask her excitement. "But we're experiencing an astronomical alignment that occurs only once every 50 years. Several stars and planets are lining up with a specific formation in the canyon you showed me, creating a perfect sight line to a normally invisible dark nebula. The indigenous petroglyphs reference this alignment as the Eye of the Sky opening. And Gabriel, it reaches its perfect alignment at midnight on April 17th, tomorrow night." Morning brought 5 vehicles to my property, a strange procession of ordinary people who had driven from across the American Southwest. All were descendants of the original ritual participants, all drawn by dreams and compulsions they couldn't explain. Vernon Miller's daughter Lisa had brought her catatonic father, found wandering in the desert near Taos. 3 others arrived in similar conditions, awake but unresponsive, moving only when directed toward the canyon. Only Carlos Vigil, Pedro's nephew from Albuquerque, seemed fully cognizant, having come to find his uncle after Pedro escaped from the hospital during the night. "They've been arriving for days," Maria Vigil told us when we gathered at her home, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Not just family, others too, people who've lived on this land over the years. The canyon calls to anyone who's spent enough time in its shadow." She described tourists showing up at local businesses asking for directions, hikers discovered wandering off-trail in the mountains, all describing the same dreams, all drawn to the site where Miller had performed his ritual. Park rangers had closed the public lands adjacent to my property after finding bizarre arrangements of stones and animal remains left by these pilgrims. Carlos, a professor of anthropology specializing in southwestern indigenous cultures, had brought research that connected Miller's ritual to much older practices. "The canyon has been a power site for millennia," he explained, spreading maps on Maria's kitchen table. Ancestral Puebloan, Navajo, Apache, all avoided permanent settlement in that specific area, but used it for vision quests and communication with the spirit world. He pointed out how the unusual rock formations naturally amplified sound in ways that created infrasound vibrations known to affect human consciousness, potentially explaining the psychological pull the place exerted. By sunset, our group had grown to nearly 20 people, a bizarre gathering of strangers connected only by blood and shared hallucinations. Some remained unresponsive, staring fixedly in the direction of the canyon. Others paced nervously, comparing notes on their dreams and the strange compulsions that had brought them here. The night sky above was spectacular and terrifying. The aurora had intensified into a dome of writhing light centered precisely above the canyon, with darker patches that seemed to swirl inward like water circling a drain. The urge to go to the canyon was becoming unbearable. My headache had returned with crippling force, accompanied by whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Miller's book vibrated on the table where I'd placed it, its pages flipping open of their own accord to reveal diagrams of the very celestial alignment occurring above us. Most disturbing was the realization that I could now read even the most obscure passages with perfect comprehension, as if the knowledge had been downloaded directly into my mind. "We have to finish what they started," Vernon Miller suddenly announced, his catatonia broken as he rose from his chair with jerky, unnatural movements. His voice contained harmonics that made my teeth ache. "The crossing must be completed. 7 to open, 5 to receive." The other formerly catatonic visitors echoed his words in perfect unison, their eyes reflecting the aurora's light in ways that human eyes should not. Before anyone could react, they had moved to the door with synchronized precision, heading toward the canyon. Carlos, Lisa, and I followed them, joined by others from our group who seemed unable to resist the pull. The night air vibrated with an energy that made my skin crawl, static electricity raising the hair on my arms. As we approached the canyon, I noticed others converging on the site, strangers who must have been drawn by the same force, emerging from the darkness like sleepwalkers. Some wore hiking gear. Others looked as if they'd left home with no preparations, wearing pajamas or house slippers despite the cold night air. The circular clearing had transformed since my last visit. The stone I'd found was now fully exposed, revealing intricate carvings that glowed with a blue-white light that matched the aurora overhead. The air above it shimmered like heat waves, occasionally showing glimpses of something else. Another landscape, perhaps, or another dimension, a place of twisted geometries and colors that hurt to look at directly. Vernon and the other catatonics had arranged themselves around the stone in the same positions as Miller's group in 1887, their arms outstretched as if in welcome. What happened next defies rational explanation. The shimmer above the stone expanded suddenly, forming a vertical pool of light that rotated slowly, creating a vortex that seemed to both pull inward and push outward simultaneously. Through it, I caught glimpses of entities, forms that shifted between something vaguely humanoid and configurations of angles and appendages that violated the laws of physics. They were attempting to push through, but meeting resistance at the boundary, like pressing against a membrane that wouldn't quite tear. "They need vessels," Carlos shouted over the growing wind that spiraled around us. 5 descendants of the original participants. That's why we're all here. They're shopping for the most suitable hosts. His scientific detachment was crumbling in the face of the impossible event unfolding before us. He grabbed my arm, pointing to Vernon and the others. "Look at their eyes." What I had taken for unusual reflections of the aurora was something else entirely. Their eyes had transformed into swirling vortices that matched the gateway, miniature versions of the portal opening above the stone. Vernon Miller began to change before our eyes, his body elongating impossibly, joints bending backward as something worked its way into our reality, using his form as an anchor. The others in the circle underwent similar transformations, their flesh rippling and reshaping itself around entities that defied comprehension. Their screams modulated from human agony to something more complex, a communication or perhaps a summoning. The gateway expanded with each passing second, the boundary between worlds growing thinner as midnight approached. In that moment of pure terror, I finally understood what had happened in 1887, and again in 1937 and 1987. The ritual wasn't meant to glimpse the future, that was merely the bait. Its true purpose was to create doorways within human bloodlines, genetic keys that could unlock the way for something ancient to enter our world. Each previous attempt had been interrupted or incomplete, but the entities were patient, willing to wait 50 years between attempts, manipulating descendants through dreams and compulsions. Now, with a sufficient number of bloodline descendants gathered, They had enough options to complete the crossing. Carlos had come prepared, thank God. While researching his uncle's ravings, he had consulted colleagues who specialized in various religious and mystical traditions. From his backpack, he produced items gathered from multiple spiritual practices: Navajo protection prayers, Catholic holy water, bundles of sacred herbs, and most crucially, photocopied pages from rare texts describing methods for closing interdimensional breaches. Every culture has encountered these things, he shouted over the rising winds. Every tradition has developed defenses. As Vernon and the others completed their transformations into things no longer human, Carlos organized those of us still ourselves into a counter-ritual. We formed a circle outside the inner one, facing outward rather than inward, creating a boundary. Following Carlos's instructions, we began reciting prayers and incantations from a dozen different traditions. The words didn't matter, he insisted, only the intent and the combined psychic energy of our resistance. Lisa Miller showed particular strength, her voice unwavering as she stared at the thing that had been her father, now a twisted parody of human form. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. The entities, sensing our resistance, reached through their vessels toward us, elongated limbs stretching with impossible elasticity. One caught a man standing near me, a software engineer from Phoenix who had followed his dreams to this place. The moment the entity touched him, he began to desiccate before our eyes, his body crumbling like ancient parchment as something was extracted from him. His eyes liquefied and flowed upward, defying gravity, absorbed into the swirling vortex above. Carlos pushed a copy of Miller's book into my hands, not my translated version, but the original I'd found in the canyon. It has to be returned, he shouted over the chaotic sounds of wind and inhuman voices. The book is the anchor on this side. It's what keeps the gateway viable across time. I understood immediately what needed to be done. Clutching the book to my chest, I broke from our protective circle and dashed toward the vortex, directly through the ring of transformed vessels. Time seemed to slow as I passed between two of the entities. I felt their awareness shift to me, felt probing tendrils of thought trying to infiltrate my mind. Visions flooded my consciousness, offers of knowledge, power, immortality, followed by threats of unimaginable torment. Most seductive were the glimpses of future events, technologies not yet invented, disasters that could be prevented, market shifts that could generate billions. I understood then how Miller and others had been corrupted, how appealing these entities could make themselves when seeking entry to our world. I reached the center stone and held the book toward the vortex. The reaction was immediate. The swirling gateway constricted, its rotation speeding up as if trying to pull away from the object in my hands. The transformed vessels turned toward me with movements that no human skeleton could achieve, their faces now merely suggestions on forms that had become primarily alien. Vernon Miller's entity spoke directly into my mind. Your grandfather denied us. Will you deny your legacy as well? The knowledge we offer could transform humanity. For one terrible moment, I hesitated, seduced by the visions flooding my mind. Cures for diseases, solutions to climate change, technologies that could end poverty. The book grew hot in my hands, its pages flipping wildly to show me glimpses of possible futures where I was celebrated as humanity's greatest benefactor. The entity wearing Vernon's transformed body extended what had once been a hand, now a writhing appendage with too many digits. Join us freely, and the transition will be painless. Fight, and we will take what we need regardless. The vision that finally broke their hold wasn't of the future, but the past. My grandfather Ramon sitting on this very ranch's portal, telling my father why he must never return to this place. I had never met Ramon, had only heard stories, yet somehow I could see this moment with perfect clarity, could hear his voice warning that some prices were too high, some knowledge too dangerous. I understood then that he had faced this same choice in 1987 and had chosen to walk away, to break the cycle even at the cost of abandoning his beloved home. With a strength born of desperation, I hurled Miller's book directly into the center of the vortex. The reaction was catastrophic and immediate. The gateway contracted violently, pulling the book into whatever space existed on the other side. The transformed vessels screamed in unified agony as the entities began to be pulled back, their anchor in our reality weakening. Vernon Miller's body collapsed first, the entity withdrawing from it like smoke being sucked into a vacuum, leaving behind a desiccated husk. One by one, the others followed, their distorted forms returning to merely human corpses as the entities retreated. As the vortex collapsed in on itself, a final psychic message seared itself into my mind. 50 years. We will return. The bloodlines remember. Then the gateway snapped shut with a thunderclap that knocked everyone still standing to the ground. The aurora overhead dispersed like smoke and wind, leaving only the normal stars of the New Mexico night sky. Around the central stone lay 5 bodies, the descendants who had been chosen as vessels, now withered husks with empty eye sockets, identical to the victims from 1887, 1937, and likely 1987. The following days passed in a blur of police investigations, psychiatric evaluations, and hushed conversations with the other survivors. The official explanation labeled the incident a mass psychosis triggered by a combination of unusual aurora activity, hallucinogenic fungi found growing in the canyon, and group suggestion. The 5 deaths were attributed to exposure and dehydration, the victims having supposedly wandered the desert for days before our shared hallucination at the canyon. Those of us who knew the truth recognized the familiar pattern. The inexplicable rendered explicable through science that couldn't admit the existence of the impossible. Carlos Vigil devoted himself to researching what had happened, creating a detailed record for future generations who might face the same threat. His uncle Pedro passed away 3 days after the incident, but not before extracting a promise that Carlos would maintain the watch. Lisa Miller established a foundation to locate and monitor all known descendants of the original 5 families, creating a network that could recognize the warning signs when the 50-year cycle approached again. Others from that night scattered across the country, trying to forget, though the occasional email or phone call confirmed that none of us truly could. As for me, I sold the ranch to the Pueblo of Pewaukee Land Trust with the strict condition that the canyon be permanently sealed and declared a sacred site never to be developed or open to the public. I moved to a small apartment in Santa Fe, unable to return to my previous life but unwilling to leave New Mexico entirely. The compulsion to be near the canyon never fully disappeared. Some nights I still wake facing east, my body trying to sleepwalk toward that circular clearing. I've learned to chain my bedroom door on the anniversary of the incident. The most unsettling development came 9 months after that night, when I began having new dreams, not of the canyon or the entities, but of a dark nebula in deep space, a void between stars that somehow watches our world. In these dreams, I see the book, Miller's Journal, floating intact in that impossible void, its pages slowly turning as if read by an unseen presence. Sometimes I wake from these dreams to find my eyes burning with pain, my vision briefly transformed so that I see overlapping realities, our world and somewhere else simultaneously. These episodes are becoming more frequent as the years pass. I've left detailed instructions with both Carlos and Lisa about what should be done if I begin to change, if the influence from beyond the gateway begins to use me as a vessel between cycles. The threat isn't gone, merely postponed. In 50 years, when the stars align again, others will face the same choice we did. I can only hope they'll be prepared, that our records and warnings will give them the knowledge to resist the whispers from beyond. In the meantime, I avoid mirrors during the spring when the nightmares intensify. I've seen enough to know that sometimes, just sometimes, what looks back at me from the reflective surface is not entirely myself anymore. The gateway may be closed, but once you've glimpsed what lies beyond, a part of you always remains on the other side. Dust crunched under my boots as I hauled the last solar panel up the rocky trail to my new home. I'm Elias Morrow, 34 years old, and I'd just traded city noise for the silent vastness of Taos, New Mexico. The cabin I'd built sat on a sagebrush-dotted ridge, miles from anyone, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains looming like silent judges. I wanted freedom, a life unplugged, growing my own food, relying on nobody. The horror of city stress was behind me, or so I thought. My nearest neighbor, if you could call her that, was Verna, a wiry 60-year-old who lived in a yurt 3 miles down the valley. She'd drop by with jars of prickly pear jam, muttering about old spirits in the hills. I laughed it off. Myths don't scare me. The cabin was rough, but mine. Hand-hewn logs, a wood stove, a composting toilet I was still figuring out. I'd spent months planning, saving, learning how to live off-grid. No Wi-Fi, no utility bills, just me, the wind, and the stars. My buddy Theo, a lanky guy with a knack for fixing anything, helped me set up the water catchment system before heading back to Albuquerque. He warned me about isolation, said it could mess with your head. I shrugged. I'd always been a loner. The first night, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the sunset bleed red over the mesa. It felt right. Peaceful. Too peaceful, maybe. Verna stopped by the next morning, her eyes sharp as she handed me another jar of jam. "You hear the whispers yet?" she asked, half smiling. I chuckled, thinking she was just eccentric. She meant the wind, right? Taos was full of weird stories. La Llorona, the weeping ghost, or tales of skinwalkers, Navajo spirits that could shift into animals. I didn't buy into that. I'd read about them online before moving, dismissed it as folklore. But Verna's stare lingered, like she knew something I didn't. I thanked her and got back to splitting firewood. The axe felt good in my hands, grounding me. Days blended into weeks. I planted a small garden, corn, beans, squash, hoping the thin soil would cooperate. The work was hard but satisfying. I'd wake at dawn, check the solar batteries, haul water from the catchment tank. Life was simple, but the quiet started to feel heavy. Not scary, just watchful, like the land was sizing me up. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder while fetching tools from the shed. Nothing was there, of course, just sagebrush and the endless sky. I told myself it was the solitude Theo warned about. Your mind plays tricks when it's just you and the wind. One evening, I found an old arrowhead half buried near the creek. It was sharp, obsidian, glinting like it had been placed there. I pocketed it, thinking it was a cool find. Verna, when I showed her, went pale. "Put it back," she said, voice low. "Some things don't belong to you." I laughed, assuming she was being dramatic. She didn't laugh back. That night, I set the arrowhead on my windowsill, a little trophy of my new life. The cabin felt colder than usual, but I blamed the dropping temperatures. October in Taos gets chilly. I started noticing small things. My tools weren't always where I left them. A shovel I swore I'd leaned against the shed was lying in the dirt 10 feet away. Once, I found my garden gate unlatched, swinging in the breeze. Critters, I figured, maybe coyotes. New Mexico's wild, after all. I'd seen deer tracks near the creek, even heard wolves howling far off. But the disturbances felt deliberate. I didn't tell Verna. Didn't want her spinning more ghost stories. Still, I started locking the cabin door at night, something I hadn't bothered with before. The routine kept me sane. Wake, work, eat, sleep. I'd hike to the ridge sometimes, sketching the landscape in a notebook. Taos's beauty was raw, jagged peaks, endless desert, skies so clear they hurt to look at. But the vastness started to feel oppressive, like it was swallowing me. I missed Theo's dumb jokes, even missed arguing with baristas in the city. Out here, it was just me and my thoughts. And Verna, who'd started coming by less often. When she did, she'd squint at the hills, muttering about bad air. I didn't ask what she meant. Should've. One afternoon, I found a dead rabbit outside my door. Throat torn out, blood soaking the dirt. Coyotes, I told myself, though the kill looked too clean, too precise. I buried it, trying not to overthink. That night, I dreamed of the arrowhead, pulsing like a heartbeat on the windowsill. When I woke, it was still there, but the window was cracked open. I hadn't touched it. My stomach twisted, but I chalked it up to a faulty latch. Had to be. I wasn't ready to admit something disturbing was creeping into my perfect off-grid life. By late October, the days were shorter, the nights colder. I'd sit by the wood stove, reading old paperbacks, trying to ignore the growing unease. The cabin, once my sanctuary, felt like it was holding its breath. I'd check the locks twice, glance at the arrowhead, and tell myself I was fine. But deep down, I knew something was off. Not horror movie off, not yet, just a nagging sense that the land, or something in it, didn't want me here. I pushed the thought away. I'd come too far to turn back now. The wind howled louder now, rattling the cabin's windows like it wanted in. I'd been in Taos 3 months, and the off-grid dream was starting to fray. My garden was struggling. Half the corn wilted, no matter how much I watered it. The soil here's tough, like it's fighting you. I'd spend hours researching heirloom seeds online before moving, thinking I'd crack the code. Nope. The squash was barely hanging on, and something kept digging up the beans. Not deer, not rabbits. Whatever it was left no tracks. Just holes, like someone had scooped the dirt with their hands. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was just bad luck. I decided to hike to Verna's yurt to ask for advice. The 3-mile trek through sagebrush and pinyon pines was brutal, the air sharp with cold. Her place was a patchwork of tarps and wood, a windmill creaking nearby. She was outside, skinning a rabbit, her knife moving with scary precision. Soil's cursed, she said when I mentioned the garden, not looking up. I laughed, but her eyes flicked to mine, dead serious. She told me to scatter salt around the plants, some old Navajo trick. I nodded, humoring her, but I wasn't about to start playing witch doctor. Back at the cabin, I found my axe missing. Searched everywhere, shed, porch, even the creek. Gone. That axe was my lifeline for firewood, and winter was coming. I cursed myself for not locking the shed. Had I left it out? My memory felt fuzzy, like the solitude was eating holes in my brain. I rigged a temporary fix, using a hatchet to chop kindling, but it wasn't the same. The next day, I found the axe leaning against the cabin door, blade gleaming like it had been polished. My stomach dropped. No way I'd missed it there. I started keeping a journal, scribbling down every weird thing. The missing tools, the unlatched gate, the dead rabbit. Writing it out made it feel less crazy, but it didn't help the growing dread. I'd wake up at night, heart pounding, sure I'd heard something. Not footsteps, but a low hum, like a chant carried on the wind. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was just the desert playing tricks. Once, I swore I saw a shadow pass the window. Not a person, but something hunched, too quick to be sure. I didn't sleep much after that. Verna came by unannounced one morning, carrying a bundle of sage. "Burn this," she said, shoving it into my hands. "Keeps bad things away." I wanted to roll my eyes, but her voice had an edge, like she was scared for me. She mentioned a local story, a skinwalker, a Yeenald Lushii, that stalked these hills. Said it could mimic voices, mess with your head. I thanked her, but didn't burn the sage. I wasn't about to lean into ghost stories. Still, I kept the bundle by the door, just in case. The solar panels started acting up next. 1 minute they'd be fine, charging the batteries. The next, the output would drop to nothing. I climbed up to check, expecting loose wires or dust. Nothing, just a faint scratch mark on one panel, like claws had raked across it. I told myself it was a bird, maybe an owl, but the mark was deep, deliberate. I spent a whole day troubleshooting, cursing under my breath. Off-grid life was supposed to be simple, not a horror show of glitches and paranoia. I decided to set up a trail camera by the garden. Figured I'd catch whatever was messing with my plants. I'd used one before, hunting with Theo years ago, so I knew how to angle it. Set it to record at night, when most of the weird stuff happened. The first night, I got nothing but static. Second night, the camera was on its side, lens cracked. I hadn't touched it. My hands shook as I reset it, telling myself it was just kids from town. Maybe. Taos wasn't that far. But deep down, I knew no one was hiking out here at night. I started avoiding the creek after dusk. Something about it felt wrong now, like the water itself was watching. The arrowhead on my windowsill seemed to catch the moonlight differently, almost glowing. I thought about Verna's warning to put it back, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Instead, I nailed the window shut. Bad move, probably. Trapping myself in with whatever was out there felt dumber by the day. But I wasn't ready to admit this place was getting to me. Not yet. By November, the air was brittle, the nights long and dark. I'd sit by the wood stove, journal in hand, writing down every detail to keep my head straight. The humming was louder now, not just in my dreams. It felt like it was coming from the ground itself, vibrating through the cabin floor. I didn't tell Verna. Didn't want her thinking I was losing it. But as I stared at that arrowhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that something disturbing was closing in, waiting for me to slip up. The humming woke me at 3 a.m., louder than ever, like a chant burrowing into my skull. I bolted upright, hard hammering, the cabin dark except for the faint glow of the arrowhead on the windowsill. It was pulsing, not my imagination, not anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, hands shaky, and aimed it at the window. Nothing outside but sagebrush swaying in the wind. Still, the air felt thick, like something was pressing against the walls. I didn't sleep again that night. The horror of it wasn't just the sound. It was the feeling that something knew I was listening. Morning didn't bring relief. I checked the trail camera, hoping for answers. The footage was a mess, static, then a flash of something moving, too fast to make out. Not an animal, not a person, just a blur, low to the ground, with eyes that caught the infrared like twin sparks. My stomach churned. I'd seen enough horror movies to know this wasn't normal. I played it back, frame by frame, but the image cut out right after those eyes appeared. The camera was still working, but the memory card was fried. Whatever was out there didn't want to be seen. I hiked to Verna's yurt, desperate for her to make sense of this. She was splitting wood, her face grim when I told her about the humming, the footage. "You didn't put the arrowhead back?" she said, not a question. I admitted I hadn't, and her eyes narrowed. She told me about a Navajo legend, a skinwalker tied to this land, bound to objects like that arrowhead. Disturbing it could wake it, call it to you. "It knows your name now," she said, voice low. I wanted to laugh, but the words stuck in my throat. She gave me a pouch of cedar ash, told me to spread it around the cabin. I took it, unsure. Back home, I found the garden destroyed. Every plant was uprooted, the soil churned into mounds like graves. No tracks, no claw marks, just chaos. My hands shook as I sprinkled Verna's ash around the cabin, feeling like an idiot but too rattled to care. The air felt wrong, heavy with a smell like burnt hair. I kept glancing at the hills, half expecting to see those eyes from the footage. Nothing. But the silence was worse than the humming. It was like the land was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair and kept my hatchet by the bed. The humming started again, closer, like it was circling the cabin. I clutched the hatchet, sweat beading on my neck despite the cold. Then I heard it, a voice, faint, calling my name. Elias. Not Verna's voice, not anyone's I knew. It was low, guttural, like it came from the earth itself. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare look out the window. The horror of it wasn't just the voice. It was how it knew me, how it felt personal. I burned Verna's sage, choking on the smoke, hoping it'd do something. The voice stopped, but the humming didn't. It was inside the walls now, vibrating through the logs. I checked the arrowhead, still on the windowsill, but the glass around it was cracked, spiderwebbing like something had pressed against it from outside. I grabbed it, meaning to throw it out, but it burned my hand, hot as a coal. I dropped it, cursing, and saw a red welt forming on my palm. This wasn't just creepy folklore anymore. Something was very, very wrong. The next day, I found scratches on the cabin door, deep, jagged, like claws but too precise for an animal. I told myself it was a mountain lion, but I'd seen their marks before. These were different, almost deliberate, like a message. I called Theo, my phone barely getting a signal. He laughed when I told him about the voice, said I was losing it out here. "Come back to Albuquerque," he said. I wanted to, but pride kept me rooted. I'd sunk everything into this place. Running felt like admitting defeat. I decided to bury the arrowhead, thinking maybe Verna was right. I hiked to the creek, dug a hole, and dropped it in. The ground felt warm, like it was alive. As I covered it, the humming started again, louder, angrier. I stumbled back, heart racing, and saw something move in the pinyon trees, those eyes again, glinting in the dusk. I ran, not stopping until I was inside, door locked. The air was thick with that burnt hair smell, and the cabin felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. By nightfall, I was jumping at every creak. The humming was relentless now, joined by scratches outside, slow and deliberate. I sat by the wood stove, hatchet in hand, staring at the door. The voice came again, Elias, drawn out, mocking. It wasn't human. I knew that now. Whatever was out there wasn't just a myth, it was real, and it was coming for me. The terror was suffocating, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was wait, gripping the hatchet, praying I'd make it to morning. The scratching on the door turned into pounding, each thud shaking the cabin like a heartbeat. I gripped the hatchet, my knuckles white, sweat stinging the welt on my palm. The voice hissed my name again, Elias, dragging it out like a curse. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was outside wasn't just toying with me, it wanted in. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with essentials, water, flashlight, knife, the cedar ash Verna gave me. The horror of it was suffocating, but I had to move. I unbarricaded the door, heart hammering, and peered through the crack. Nothing but darkness and that burnt hair smell. I had one shot to get to Verna's yurt. I sprinted into the night, the cold biting my face, sagebrush snagging my jeans. The humming followed, loud and pulsing, like it was inside my head. I didn't look back, couldn't afford to. The trail to Verna's was 3 miles of rough terrain, and I'd never run it in the dark. My flashlight beam danced over rocks and pinyon trees, catching glints of those eyes in the distance. They were tracking me, low and fast, weaving through the shadows. My lungs burned, but stopping wasn't an option. This was life or death, and I wasn't ready to die in Taos. Halfway there, I tripped over a root, sprawling into the dirt. My flashlight skittered away, its beam flickering out. I scrambled up, heart in my throat, and heard it. A low growl, not animal, not human, too close. I threw a handful of cedar ash behind me, praying Verna's trick would work. The growling stopped, but the humming didn't. I ran blind, guided by moonlight, my boots pounding the earth. I'd hiked this path before, but now it felt alive, twisting under me like it wanted me lost. The air was thick, oppressive, like the desert itself was against me. Verna's yurt was in sight, a faint glow from her fire cutting through the dark. I pounded on her door, yelling her name. She opened it, eyes wide, and yanked me inside. "You idiot," she hissed, bolting the door. I told her everything. The voice, the eyes, the arrowhead. She didn't look surprised, just grim. "It's tied to you now," she said, tossing more sage into the fire. The smoke stung my eyes, but it felt safer than outside. She handed me a knife, its handle carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "Keep this close," she said. I nodded, too scared to argue. We sat by the fire, listening. The humming was fainter now, but still there, circling the yurt. Verna muttered prayers in a language I didn't know, her hands trembling. I clutched the knife, its weight grounding me. Hours passed, the night stretching on forever. Then, a scream, high, guttural, not human, tore through the silence. It wasn't close, but it was angry. Verna's face went pale. "It's hunting," she whispered. I wanted to ask what, but the answer was obvious. Me. The horror of being prey was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Verna had a plan. She said we could drive to Taos, find a medicine man who knew how to break the skinwalker's hold. Her old truck was parked behind the yurt, but getting to it meant crossing open ground. We waited until dawn, when the humming faded slightly. "They're weaker in daylight," she said, but her voice wasn't convincing. We grabbed what we could, water, blankets, her rifle, and crept outside. The air was still, too still, like the calm before a storm. I scanned the hills, expecting those eyes, but saw nothing. Yet, the truck was a rusted beast, but it started on the second try. I climbed in, Verna at the wheel, and we tore down the dirt road toward Taos. The humming surged, louder than ever, and I saw it, a shape darting between the trees, keeping pace. It was tall, hunched, its limbs too long, moving like nothing natural. My heart stopped. Verna floored it, the truck rattling over rocks. "Don't look at it," she yelled. I couldn't help it. Its eyes locked on mine, burning with something ancient, hateful. This wasn't just a chase, it was a hunt, and I was running out of time. We hit the main road, the shape falling back, but the humming didn't stop. It was in the truck now, vibrating through the seats. Verna's hands shook on the wheel, her prayers louder. I clutched the knife, my mind racing. Taos was close, maybe 10 minutes. If we could make it, maybe we'd be safe. But the road stretched on, empty, and the desert felt alive, watching, waiting. I'd wanted freedom out here, but now I was trapped in a nightmare, fighting to survive something I didn't understand. The truck's engine sputtered, just as the town's lights appeared on the horizon. Verna cursed, slamming the dashboard. We coasted to a stop, the humming deafening now. I looked at her, panic rising. "What now?" I asked, voice cracking. She didn't answer, just grabbed the rifle and stepped out, scanning the dark. I followed, knife in hand, the air thick with that burnt hair smell. Something was coming, and we weren't safe yet. Not by a long shot. We stood by the truck, the desert silent except for that cursed humming. Verna's rifle was steady, but her eyes were wild, darting across the sagebrush. I gripped the knife, its carved handle slick with sweat. The lights of Taos were so close, maybe a mile, but it felt like another world. The shape was out there, hidden in the dark, waiting. I'd made a mistake keeping that arrowhead, thinking I could outsmart the land. Now it was too late, and the horror of it was crushing me. Verna whispered, "Stay close," and started walking toward town. I followed, every step a fight against the urge to run. The humming grew sharper, like a blade scraping bone. Then I saw it, those eyes glinting from a ditch ahead. Verna fired, the shot echoing, but the shape didn't flinch. It moved, fast, circling us. She reloaded, cursing, and told me to keep moving. My legs felt like lead, but I obeyed, the knife useless in my shaking hand. I thought of Theo, safe in Albuquerque, and wished I'd listened to him. Off-grid life wasn't freedom. It was a trap, and I'd walked right into it. The air was thick, the smell of burnt hair choking me. We reached an old adobe church on the edge of town, its cross barely visible in the dawn light. Verna said it was sacred ground, that we'd be safe inside. We ran for it, the shape closing in, its form clearer now, tall, twisted, with skin like ash and eyes that burned into me. The door was unlocked, and we stumbled inside, slamming it shut. The humming stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Verna lit a candle, her hands trembling. "We need to find the medicine man," she said, but her voice was hollow. I nodded, too scared to speak. Inside, the church felt wrong. The air was heavy, the shadows too deep. I noticed scratches on the pews, like the ones on my cabin door. My stomach dropped. Verna didn't see them. She was busy sprinkling ash around the altar, muttering prayers. I wanted to believe we were safe, but the knife in my hand felt like a toy. Then I heard it. My name, whispered from the back of the church. Not Verna's voice. Not human. I froze, the horror sinking deeper. It had followed us. It wasn't bound to the land. It was bound to me. Verna turned, her face pale. "You brought it here," she said, voice breaking. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The candle flickered, casting shadows that moved on their own. I backed toward the altar, clutching the knife, and saw it. The shape, standing in the doorway. It wasn't just a skinwalker anymore. It was something older, crueler, wearing my fear like a mask. Verna raised her rifle, but her hands shook too much to aim. I realized my mistake. I hadn't just disturbed the arrowhead. I'd invited this thing into my life. The shape lunged, faster than I could scream. Verna fired, the shot wild, hitting the wall. I swung the knife, catching its arm, but it didn't bleed, just laughed, a sound that tore through me. Verna grabbed my arm, dragging me toward a side door. We burst outside, the dawn light blinding, but the shape was gone. We ran, stumbling through the streets of Taos, until we reached a small house where Verna said the medicine man lived. She pounded on the door, yelling for help. No answer. The humming started again, faint but growing. I turned, scanning the street, and saw it. The shape, standing at the edge of town, watching. Verna was crying now, her prayers useless. I knew we couldn't outrun it forever. In a panic, I made my final mistake. I threw the knife at it, thinking it'd buy us time. The shape caught it, midair, and smiled. A grin that wasn't human, wasn't anything I could understand. It started walking toward us, slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. My heart sank. I doomed us both. Verna collapsed, sobbing, clutching the rifle like a lifeline. I tried to pull her up, but she was heavy, unresponsive. The shape was closer now, its eyes locked on mine. I realized the tragedy of it. I'd come to Taos for freedom, but I'd brought death instead. Not just to me, but to Verna, who'd try to save me. The medicine man's door stayed shut, the street empty. No one was coming. The shape reached us, its hand cold as it grazed my face. My vision blurred, the humming deafening, and I knew I'd never leave this place. The last thing I saw was Verna's face, twisted in fear, as the shape turned to her. I'd led it straight to her, my arrogance sealing her fate. The horror wasn't just my death, it was knowing I'd caused hers. The desert swallowed us both, and Taos's silence became our tomb. My off-grid dream ended in blood, a cruel reminder that some things can't be escaped, no matter how far you run. The Gila wilderness swallowed my truck's rumble as I pulled up to my new home, a ramshackle cabin tucked against a cliff. I'm Nora Callahan, 29 years old, and I'd ditched my desk job in Las Cruces for this. Acres of pine and solitude, no neighbors, no noise. The horror of office politics and city crowds was gone, replaced by the raw beauty of New Mexico's backcountry. I'd been prepping for this for years, saving for solar panels, learning to filter spring water. My only contact out here was Amos, a grizzled 50-something who ran a trading post 10 miles away. He'd help me haul supplies, grumbling about bad vibes in these woods. I brushed it off. I was here to live free. The cabin was basic: log walls, a tin roof, a wood stove I'd mastered after a few smoky disasters. I'd spent months planning, watching YouTube videos on composting toilets and rainwater collection. My sister, Lila, thought I was nuts, calling from Santa Fe to lecture me about bears and loneliness. I laughed. She'd never get it. I wanted to grow my own food, hunt if I had to, be self-sufficient. The first week, I set up my garden beds, the soil rich but rocky. At night, I'd sit on the porch, sipping tea, watching the stars blaze over the Gila's endless pines. It felt like paradise. Amos stopped by with a crate of canned goods, his pickup rattling down the dirt track. "You find the old shrine yet?" he asked, squinting at the forest. I hadn't, but he pointed to a trail behind the cabin, said it led to a stone marker from way back, maybe Apache or something older. "Don't mess with it," he warned, his voice low. I nodded, figuring he was just superstitious. New Mexico's full of stories. Mogollon Monster, a Bigfoot-like creature folks swear roams these hills. I wasn't buying it. I'd rather deal with bears than ghosts. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into a rhythm. Wake at dawn, check the solar setup, tend the garden, carrots, kale, potatoes. The work was hard but good, my hands calloused but happy. Amos dropped off a radio so I could call him if a storm hit. He kept mentioning the shrine, saying weird stuff like, "Things get lost out here if you're not careful." I smiled, humoring him, but I was curious. One afternoon, I hiked the trail he'd mentioned. The forest was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the wilderness vibe. I found the shrine an hour in, a circle of stones, weathered and mossy, with a carved wooden figure in the center. It was crude, humanoid, with deep-set eyes that seemed to stare right through me. A chill ran down my spine, but I chalked it up to the wind. I took a photo with my phone, thinking Lila might get a kick out of it. That night, the cabin felt colder, the air heavier. I laughed at myself. Old carvings don't haunt people. Still, I locked the door, a habit from the city I couldn't shake. The garden started acting up a week later. My kale was wilting, roots chewed like something had clawed them out. I blamed voles, set traps, but caught nothing. Then my shovel went missing, only to turn up stuck in the ground near the trail, blade caked with dirt I hadn't touched. I told myself it was forgetfulness. Off-grid life was new, stressful. But the forest felt different now, like it was watching. I'd catch myself glancing at the trees while fetching water, half expecting something to step out. Nothing did. Yet, Amos came by again, his face creased with worry when I mentioned the shrine. "You didn't take anything, did you?" he asked, sharp. I hadn't, but I admitted to the photo. He shook his head, muttering about stirring things up. He gave me a bundle of dried herbs. "Juniper," he said, "for protection." I thanked him, but I wasn't about to start burning herbs like some sage-slinging hippie. Still, I kept the bundle by the door just to ease my mind. The Gila was wild, but I wasn't scared. Not yet. One night, I woke to a low rumble, not thunder, more like a growl, deep in the earth. My heart raced, but the cabin was still, the radio silent. I checked the locks, peered out the window. Nothing but pines swaying in the moonlight. I told myself it was a dream, but sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I found a footprint near the garden. Not human, not bear, too big and clawed. My stomach twisted. I'd read about the Mogollon Monster, dismissed it as campfire talk. Now, I wasn't so sure. By late November, the nights were long, the air sharp with frost. I'd sit by the wood stove, sketching the shrine from memory, trying to shake the unease. The cabin, my haven, felt smaller, like the walls were listening. I kept the radio close. Amos's warning stuck in my head. Something disturbing was creeping into my off-grid life, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told myself I was tough, that I'd handle whatever the Gila threw at me. But deep down, I knew something was out there, waiting for me to slip. The garden was a mess. My carrots were uprooted, their tops gnawed to stubs. I'd spent weeks babying those plants, checking soil pH like some nerdy farmer, but something was tearing them apart. No tracks, no scat, just chaos. I told myself it was elk, maybe javelina, but the damage felt too precise, like it was personal. The horror of losing my food supply hit hard. I'd sunk everything into this off-grid life. I decided to set up a motion sensor light by the garden, figuring it'd scare off whatever was out there. Wiring it to the solar battery was a pain, but I needed answers. Amos came by with more supplies, his truck kicking up dust on the trail. He saw the garden and frowned, scratching his beard. "Told you not to mess with that shrine," he said, half serious. I laughed it off, but his eyes lingered on the forest, like he saw something I didn't. He mentioned the Mogollon monster again, said folks had seen it near old shrines like the one I'd found. "Big, hairy, mean as hell," he said. I rolled my eyes, but when he left, I sprinkled his juniper herbs around the garden. Felt dumb, but I was spooked. The motion light worked, for a night. Then it started flickering, even when nothing tripped it. I'd wake to it strobing, casting shadows that looked too tall, too wrong. One morning, I found it smashed, wires ripped out like someone had yanked them with bare hands. My stomach twisted. I'd set it up high, out of reach of any animal. I tried calling Amos on the radio, but static drowned out his voice. The Gila's isolation was starting to feel less like freedom and more like a trap. I didn't want to admit it, but something disturbing was creeping in. I started hiking to the shrine again, thinking maybe I'd missed something. The trail felt different now, narrower, the pines crowding closer. When I got there, the stone circle was the same, but the wooden figure looked off. Its eyes seemed deeper, like they followed me. I checked the photo on my phone. It hadn't looked like that before. My heart raced, but I told myself it was just paranoia. Still, I didn't linger. On the way back, I found my hatchet stuck in a tree, blade buried deep. I hadn't touched it in days. No way I'd left it there. Nights were worse. The growling I'd heard before came back, louder, closer, rattling the cabin windows. I'd lie awake, clutching a kitchen knife, telling myself it was just a bear. But bears don't growl like that, like they're angry, like they know you're listening. I started sleeping with the radio on, static or not, just to drown out the silence. Once, I swore I heard my name in the static, low and guttural. "Nora." My blood froze. I turned it off, heart pounding, and checked the locks twice. This wasn't just wildlife. I decided to reinforce the cabin. I nailed boards over the windows, leaving slits to see out. It felt like overkill, but the smashed light and missing tools had me on edge. I'd read about people going stir-crazy out here, like that guy in Alaska who lived alone and started seeing things. Was that me? I didn't think so, but the doubt gnawed at me. I called Lila, my phone barely getting a signal. She laughed when I mentioned the growling, said I needed a dog. I wished she was right, but this felt darker, more sinister. The next day, I found claw marks on the cabin door, deep, jagged, too big for a cougar. They weren't there the night before. My hands shook as I traced them. The wood splintered like something had tried to claw its way in. I told myself it was an animal, but the marks were too high, too deliberate. I burned Amos's juniper herbs that night, the smoke thick and bitter. It didn't help. The growling came back, circling the cabin, and I swear I saw a shadow past the window slit. Tall, hunched, not human. My heart was in my throat. I started keeping a journal, scribbling every weird thing to keep my head straight. The chewed plants, the smashed light, the voice and the static. Writing it out made it real, and that was terrifying. I thought about packing up, driving back to Las Cruces, but I'd poured my savings into this place. Quitting felt like failure. Still, I kept the truck keys by the door, just in case. The Gila was supposed to be my escape, but now it felt like a cage, and something was out there, watching, waiting for me to slip up. By December, the forest was silent, the air heavy with snow. The growling stopped, but that was worse, like whatever was out there was biding its time. I checked the shrine trail daily, half hoping I'd find nothing, half dreading what I'd see. The wooden figure was still there, its eyes seeming to shift every time I looked. I didn't take more photos, something told me that was a bad idea. But as I hiked back one evening, the growling started again, low and close, and I knew I'd made a mistake coming out here alone. I woke to the growl tearing through the night, so loud it shook the cabin's walls. My heart slammed against my ribs as I grabbed the knife, the blade glinting in the wood stove's glow. The sound wasn't just animal, it was angry, deliberate, like it knew I was awake. I crept to the window slit, peering into the dark. Nothing but pines, but the air felt wrong, thick with that burnt fur smell I couldn't shake. The horror of it hit me hard. This wasn't just the Gila playing tricks. Something was out there, and it was coming for me. Morning brought no comfort. I checked the garden, hoping for normalcy, but found a deer carcass near the trail, gutted, its ribs splayed like a warning. No paw prints, no drag marks, just blood soaking the snow. My stomach churned. I'd hunted before, seen kills, but this was different. Too clean, too cruel. I radioed Amos, static crackling before his voice came through. "Get out," he said, no preamble. "That thing's awake." He meant the Mogollon monster, the creature tied to the shrine. I wanted to argue, but the carcass said enough. I hiked to the shrine, knife in hand, needing to see it again. The stone circle was untouched, but the wooden figure was gone. Just a patch of churned dirt where it had stood. My breath caught. Someone, or something, had taken it. I remembered Amos's warning about stirring things up, how the monster was said to guard sacred places. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the photo of the figure still there, but now it looked distorted, the eyes too wide, too real. I deleted it, heart racing, and ran back to the cabin. The growling came again that night, closer, circling like a predator sizing up prey. I barricaded the door with my table, hands shaking as I clutched the knife. Then I heard it. My name, Nora, growled low, like gravel in a throat that wasn't human. It came from the porch, right outside the door. My blood froze. I'd read about the Mogollon monster mimicking voices, luring people into the woods. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there, the horror sinking deeper. This wasn't a story anymore. It was real. I burned Amos's juniper herbs, the smoke choking but calming my nerves. The growling stopped, but scratches started, slow, deliberate, clawing at the walls. I checked the window slits, saw nothing, but the shadows seemed to shift, like something was just out of sight. I radioed Amos again, begging him to come. Static, then his voice, faint, hide. "It's not what you think." The line cut out. I didn't know what he meant, but the fear in his voice was new, and it scared me more than the growling. The next day, I found the wooden figure on my porch, its eyes carved deeper, smeared with something dark, blood, maybe. My hands shook as I kicked it into the snow, not daring to touch it. The air felt heavier, like the forest itself was pressing in. I decided to set traps, old bear traps from the shed, rusted but functional. I'd watched my dad set them when I was a kid, so I knew the basics. I placed them around the cabin, hoping they'd catch whatever was out there. It felt like a long shot, but I was desperate. Night fell, and the growling turned into a howl, piercing, unnatural, echoing through the pines. One of the traps snapped shut, the clang sharp in the silence. I grabbed the knife, heart pounding, and peeked out. Nothing in the trap, but the snow around it was churned, claw marks everywhere. The figure was back on the porch, upright, like it had walked there. I slammed the door shut, my mind screaming that this was beyond disturbing. It was evil, tied to that shrine, and it wasn't letting go. I tried the radio again, but it was dead, not even static. The cabin felt like a cage, the walls too thin to keep that thing out. I thought about Lila, safe in Santa Fe, and wished I'd listened to her. The growling started again, closer, and I swear I saw it through the window slit. A shape, tall and hulking, with eyes that burned like coals. It wasn't just a monster, it was something older, angrier, tied to the land I'd invaded. I gripped the knife, knowing it wouldn't help. I'd made a mistake coming here, and it was too late to fix it. The howling stopped, replaced by a low hum, like the earth itself was vibrating. I sat by the wood stove, knife in one hand, Amos's herbs in the other, praying for dawn. The scratches came back, slower, almost mocking, like it was toying with me. I knew I couldn't stay, but leaving meant facing whatever was out there. The Gila had turned on me, and the terror of it was suffocating. I was alone, trapped, and something very wrong was closing in, waiting for my next move. The howling erupted again, so close it rattled my bones. I couldn't stay in the cabin. It was a death trap. The wooden figure on the porch, those claw marks, that cursed hum, it was all too much. I grabbed my backpack, shoving in water, a flashlight, and the knife. The horror of being hunted was choking me, but I had to run. Amos's trading post was my only shot, 10 miles through the Gila pines. I pried the boards off one window, heart pounding, and slipped out into the freezing night. The air stank of burnt fur, and I knew that thing was close. I ran, boots crunching snow, the forest a blur of shadows. The hum followed, vibrating through the trees, and I saw those eyes, glowing, tracking me from the darkness. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of it, tall, hulking, moving too fast for anything natural. My lungs burned, but stopping meant dying. I'd hiked these trails before, but now they twisted, like the Gila was conspiring against me. I threw Amos's juniper herbs behind me, hoping they'd slow it down. The hum faltered, but those eyes stayed locked on me. A mile in, I tripped, slamming into a frozen stream bed. My flashlight cracked, plunging me into darkness. The growling was right behind me now, low and guttural, like it was savoring the chase. I scrambled up, knife in hand, and kept running, guided by moonlight. I thought of Lila, her voice on the phone, telling me to get a dog. If only it was that simple. This was life or death, and the Mogollon monster wasn't some campfire story. It was real, and it wanted me. The forest felt alive, branches snagging my jacket like claws. I spotted Amos's trading post, a faint light flickering through the trees. Hope surged, but then I heard it. My name, Nora, growled so close I felt its breath. I sprinted, lungs screaming, and pounded on Amos's door. He yanked it open, eyes wide, and pulled me inside, bolting it shut. "You brought it here," he hissed, grabbing a shotgun from the wall. The hum was deafening now, shaking the windows. Amos tossed me a pouch of ash, muttering about old Apache rituals. I didn't care. I just wanted to survive. We sat by the fire, Amos's shotgun ready, the hum circling like a vulture. He told me the monster was tied to the shrine, a guardian spirit angered by my photo. "It knows you now," he said, voice shaking. I clutched the knife, guilt hitting hard. I'd thought I could handle the Gila, but I'd stirred up something ancient, cruel. A crash outside made us jump. A window shattered, glass spraying the floor. Amos fired into the dark, the blast deafening, but the hum didn't stop. It was inside now, in the air, in my head. Amos had a plan. His truck, parked out back, could get us to Silver City, where an old Apache elder might know how to stop this. We waited for a lull in the howling, then crept outside, the snow lit by moonlight. The truck was there, but its tires were slashed, deep claw marks raking the metal. My heart sank. Amos cursed, scanning the trees. Those eyes were back, closer, watching from the shadows. We ran back inside, barricading the door, but the hum was louder, the air thick with that burnt fur stench. We were trapped. The thing pounded the door, each blow splintering wood. Amos fired again, shouting prayers I didn't understand. I gripped the knife, useless against something this powerful. The pounding stopped, and for a moment, I thought we'd won. Then the roof creaked, claws scraping above us. It was on top of the trading post, toying with us. Amos's face was pale, his hands shaking. "We gotta move," he whispered, pointing to a back exit. I nodded, terror drowning out everything else. This was our last chance. We bolted for the exit, the hum surging like a tidal wave. Outside, the truck was useless, but Amos said we could make it to the highway on foot, flag down help. We ran, the forest closing in, those eyes never far behind. The Gila felt like a living thing, its pines whispering my name. I'd wanted freedom out here, but now I was prey, running from a nightmare I'd unleashed. The highway was close, its faint glow visible, but the growling was closer, and I knew we weren't safe yet. Amos stumbled, his ankle twisting on a root. I tried to pull him up, but the shape emerged, tall, matted with fur, its face a twisted mockery of human. It didn't rush, just watched, its eyes burning into me. Amos screamed at me to run, but I froze, knife shaking in my hand. The hum was everywhere, drowning out my thoughts. We were so close to escape, but the monster was closer, and I knew deep down we might not make it. Not both of us. The highway's glow was a lifeline, but the monster stood between us and safety. Amos clutched his shotgun, his ankle swollen, his face grim. I held the knife, its blade useless against those eyes, cruel, ancient, like they saw through me. The hum was a roar now, vibrating my bones. I'd made a mistake messing with that shrine, thinking I could outsmart the Gila. The horror of it was overwhelming. I'd brought this on us. Go, Amos yelled, shoving me toward the highway. I hesitated, guilt tearing at me, but ran, the monster's growl chasing me. I sprinted, branches clawing my face, the highway's rumble growing louder. A truck's headlights flashed in the distance. I waved, screaming, but the growling was right behind me. I turned, and there it was, closer, its form clearer now, a hulking mass of fur and bone, its face shifting, almost human but wrong. My knife slipped from my sweaty hand, clattering into the snow. The truck slowed, its driver yelling, but the monster lunged, and I dove into the ditch, heart pounding. I thought of Amos, left behind, and the tragedy of it hit like a punch. I scrambled up, the truck's door opening. The driver, a burly guy, shouted for me to get in. I climbed inside, gasping, but the monster didn't follow. It stood on the road, watching, its eyes locked on mine. The driver floored it, tires screeching, and I looked back, expecting to see Amos limping after us. Nothing, just darkness and that hum, fading but not gone. My chest ached. I'd left him, abandoned the only person who tried to help. The driver asked what happened, but I couldn't speak, the horror too raw. We reached Silver City, the truck pulling into a gas station. I tried calling Amos's radio from the driver's phone, but it was dead. The elder Amos mentioned lived nearby, a woman named Clara who knew the old ways. I found her house, a small adobe lit by candles. She listened as I stammered through the story, her face unreadable. "You took its image," she said, pointing to my phone. I swore I deleted the photo, but there it was, undelete, the figure's eyes glowing. Clara's voice was cold. "It's not just the monster. It's you." She burned the phone in a ritual fire, chanting words that made my skin crawl. The hum stopped, the air lighter, and for a moment, I thought it was over. Clara gave me a charm, a small stone carved with symbols, said it'd protect me. I thanked her, clinging to hope, and hitched a ride back to the Gila to find Amos. The forest was silent, the trading post empty. His shotgun lay in the snow, blood streaked across it. My heart sank. I'd led the monster to him, and now he was gone. I searched the trails, calling Amos's name, the charm heavy in my pocket. The shrine was my last hope. Maybe he'd gone there. The stone circle was empty, but the wooden figure was back, its eyes smeared with fresh blood. I froze, realizing my mistake. The charm wasn't protection, it was a mark. The hum surged, louder, and the monster stepped from the pines, holding Amos's jacket, torn and bloody. Its face shifted, mimicking Amos's, grinning with jagged teeth. I'd trusted Clara, but she'd lied. She was part of this, feeding the monster its prey. I ran, the charm burning in my pocket, the monster's growl shaking the earth. The highway was too far, the forest closing in. I tripped, falling hard, and it was on me, its claws grazing my back. I screamed, but no one heard. The tragedy wasn't just Amos's death, it was mine, sealed by my arrogance, thinking I could conquer the Gila. The monster didn't kill me quickly. It dragged me into the pines, the hum drowning my cries, and I knew I'd never leave. My off-grid dream became my grave, a cruel twist that ended in blood and silence. The last thing I saw was the shrine, the figure's eyes glowing as the monster's claws tightened. Amos's face flashed in my mind, his warning ignored. I'd come for freedom, but I'd unleashed something ancient, and it claimed us both. The Gila swallowed our story, leaving nothing but the hum, echoing through the pines, a warning to anyone else foolish enough to disturb its secrets.